How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another great episode with AB Investments. This is going to be obviously a live as you guys are with me. Let me say hi to my people in here. Mr. Panulo, how are you doing, sir? Mr. Derek A, how are you, brother? I'm having a great weekend, actually. It coincided with yesterday. Today is the second day. Tomorrow will be the third day for our holiday. Our Islamic holiday is called Eid. So I haven't been around obviously much. Probably had like one or two posts on the Discord itself. And I'm getting ready to also travel tomorrow. I'm going actually down to Gatlinburg to spend the whole week down there, family. You know, it's perfect timing, I feel, especially for all the anxiety that is happening around with everything. Sometimes when you don't want things to get to you, you got to get out of the, you know, the atmosphere. Tell me, gentlemen, can you guys hear me perfectly? Hopefully you can. Appreciate you, brother. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Mario. So yeah, let me guys know if you can hear me perfect or can hear me great. Perfect. So the music is not overpowering my voice, and I'm not overpowering the sounds that are going through to your ears, right? Perfect. Thanks, gentlemen. Yeah, we're gonna cover a couple of things because most of the damage as far as this last week for the stock market, we're gonna see this week now with more crazy news like what I have for you up here, guys. In fact, like one of them is this one. So China regulators fined Alibaba earlier today, Tencent for disclosure violations, and it was I believe in here, as we to look at them, they had about 28 deals, and each one was like roughly around $74,000 in US dollars. This 500,000 yuan. It's you know, when you're scrambling for many things, I mean, as you can see, guys, the corruption is everywhere. But as they scrape now and everything, and we're gonna dive into why. We also have another. As you guys seen last week, we had this Chinese property developer, Shimao. They missed their $1 billion bond. Well, earlier today, another one missed as well. Their name is Ronshine. They missed interest payments on 2 bonds, not just one. Man, this coffee is great. So yeah, so we're getting more and more. Like what now? Besides Evergrande, we got a total of 5. I think like with these 2, I think there's 2 more besides Evergrande, or 1 more. So about 4 or 5 developers, big time developers, that are missing their payments. And I'm gonna tell you guys also what is the cause of it. In fact, I covered this back in March or February, I think sometime around that time. But it wasn't for this. I was referring to the Evergrande that when they first defaulted back in January. And I was explaining why that is even happening to them and what led up to it, or what led up to those defaults. Let me just say hi first in here. I see Leah is in the house, so I have to say good evening to you. How are you, my friend? I'll probably go live tomorrow as well once I get into Gatlinburg. Who knows if hopefully there will be good service, or hopefully, you know, in whatever mountain, maybe we'll talk and the Smoky Mountains will be in the background. So we'll look forward to it. So I'm just waiting on a few more people to pop through. I understand it's Sunday. That's why, you know, it's I want to go into it. I don't want to make it too long, but you guys are in for also a small little treat. which is going to explain a lot about the precious metals. And if you keep listening to this interview, we're going to react to this interview. It's not very long, but it's a very, very good one with some really intellectual and smart individual. His name is Duncan Wood. So we're gonna listen to that after I finish with most of these coverings, and you also are gonna get out of that interview some insights onto what the next 10 years to 15 years would look like, and what are things to possibly get into. Because I hear that question with people saying, what are good things to invest in post MOAS? Well, obviously no one is a financial advisor in this channel, so we could give ideas and thoughts, real estate, all sorts of things. But with this interview, you're gonna see some things that are gonna be the direction that the human civilization is moving toward. So it's very undervalued. However, it's gonna be extremely not just valued, but overvalued in due time, some of those resources. So once we watch and react to that interview, you guys will know some of those items. So I'm glad you guys are in here. Let's see. Mr. Nickel, how are you, sir? The boss. I'm just gonna go that way. Good evening, sir. Mikey J, how are you doing, brother? Hopefully, I'm glad to see you guys in here. We got into most of this already. So we covered the Chinese defaultations. Now we got what, like 4 or 5 total developers, besides Alibaba being fined. Also, close this guy. And we already seen this guy from last week. This is the newest one. This was the guy from today. Earlier today, Ron Shine missed their interest payment as well on 2 bonds. So this is a cascading effect for more, and you'll see more and more and more are gonna happen. What is leading up to that? I'm gonna give you a very simple overlay to the whole equation, or why is it that complex there in China, as far as with developers going down with payments. We also got besides all the crazy news, we got now finally Florida is has officially, as of yesterday, been invaded by the giant African land snails. Those are actually on the top 10 list of most invasive species. And what these things do is besides looking really actually kind of cool shells, or being very cute, their issue is that they feed on so many things, everything, green, crops, they feed even on house paint. So if you live in the Florida area and they announce this, you might want to worry about or go about, I don't know, lacing your house with something that could not attract these things, that would basically go in there and start eating the paint off and chip the paint off your home. So Florida people, watch out from the giant African snails that officially are in your backyard. That's the interview. We're gonna talk about that later. And that other slide was something else. Jeffrey, how are you, brother? Whimsy Chick, nice to see you in here. Good evening. Now we're getting to catch more and more people to come in here. Okay, so let's see. Oh wow, so everybody has left us except 3 people. I don't know, I guess people will watch this after. That was part of the news. And I'm gonna stop the music soon so we can look at that. So why are the Chinese developers having these missing the interest payments on bonds and all that stuff? So in a nutshell, I'm gonna tell you guys this. One thing that a lot of people don't know about China, and that's fine, like especially YouTubers, is there's one thing that they don't know about China besides all the other things with the stock market or whatever, you know, they're doing with Evergrande or the properties, is what paved the way for this to be the case, besides obviously the what's happening with the market, right? Like as far as everything going down, every country's having high inflation and all that stuff. But why are these guys missing this? Now here's the real reason why. One, China has this law, and I've said this back in February, but again, it wasn't sought after back then, because it was just one developer, the biggest one, which was Evergrande, that defaulted. Now, what is the problem? Where's the real problem that brought all this, the roots of all this crap, is something that they have that was supposed to be good for their economy, and to a certain extent it was, except it was never ever designed. The vehicle that they've developed since back in 1949, they had their revolution, the communist revolution, and they further, you know, subjected it back in 2007 also. What they did is that you can't be a private owner or like own a land or a house in China. Doesn't matter who you are, even as a Chinese citizen. You can't own. What you can do is lease. And what that is like, you're buying the owning rights for the next up to 70 years. The longer, obviously, you're holding it down under whatever interest payment you're paying. That's how the whole thing works out. So it's way different of a shift of mindset than compared to what we were used to here. So here you're like, or anywhere else you go, you're expecting like, okay, how much is this? You buy it, it's yours. In China, that's a little different, my friends. You can't buy the land for you and generation after generation after generation. That is just yours. No, like you're buying it for the next X amount of years. And the max, as far as I know, since I'm not the biggest expert on Chinese development and laws, bylaws, is that you can have it all the way up to 70 years. But eventually the land goes back to the government. So that's crazy, right? So the problem with all that is all these, you see these property developers before I spoil it, all these developers, these property developers, they went, and what they do, like before the COVID or pre-COVID era, they would go to the government, the government will allocate money through the banks, their central banks, and these developers will go and get these loans and obviously make projects. So it gives them capital via the government to go ahead and build more. So they became more of an industrial nation. Problem is, it was never designed. That kind of system works for getting a country economy up. The only issue to it is that it was never designed to withstand a COVID shutdown, where the whole economy shuts. So basically, you're basically shutting down a machine that is not supposed to stop, because the way that they set up their structure or their government, they structured it into a way where it's on the basis that tomorrow is going to be like today. It never was structured for Judgment Day, similar to when everything stops, like what that pandemic did. So they were like, okay, we do this with that by default. That way we force the citizens to become more of a saving nation, to where people are buying these leases, because it goes a lot into, like, there's a lot that goes into it. It shifts their citizens' minds, the way they approach life. When you know that this is not for you, and you're not gonna, have it in a will for somebody after you, your offsprings. 70 years is the max that you could go ahead and own this piece of property for, and you have the rights on it and all that stuff. That's crazy. That's very, 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 very crazy. So it makes people by default change their thinking process, how to go about life, into becoming saving or saviors, like where they like to save for tomorrow because they know that at some point this is going to go away. So it's crazy, but it's never was set up for a complete shutdown. So when the whole thing got shut, payments got delayed. People are not paying. Well, everything is shut. They're not going to work. All these developers, they default on their payments, whether to outside entities or inside entities, which is like national or like within China, because they were not receiving for these, and eventually it's catching up with them. And now that, you know, obviously the markets have been reopened, what the biggest problem was in that time frame throughout the better part of 2020 and the early 2021, you had all these developers dropping their prices on things so that they can go ahead, like on property, so that because they were already over leveraged and extended on so many different projects. So they were at a point where let's finish this and jump to that. No, many of these developers were building a property here, then already building a property somewhere else, and they were already building a property somewhere else because, again, they're getting the money from the government and they're going to make payments, but that way they can make money themselves because they can go ahead and obviously sell those rights or rent, become either a renter or sell those rights to a citizen. And the problem with that is, since they got behind on so many things, and the bigger problem when people were buying for less in that 2020, 2021, before obviously any money was given out, and you know, over there was no stimulus as far as I know, like here in the US. So what they're going through is actually they're taking the whole recession head on. And the crazier part is when one property's value, because nothing is selling, nobody's buying when everything was shut, nobody had money over there. So what was happening is that developers were marking down the value of many places, which what that would cause all the other developers now to drop their prices, which means every property in that region, their value drops. And throughout the country at that point, everything's dropping in value. Because, you know, let's say I'm a Chinese citizen and I'm buying something and it says, you know, it used to be, let's say 150 grand for a condo, whatever, to have the rights for it for the next 30 years. And now it's because it got the shutdown happened, and obviously developers need to get rid of empty spaces. And they had a lot of projects that were not even finished because the money in liquidation stopped coming in for it. Now they're forced to sell this for less. Selling it for less drops the value in the overall market, which is a housing crash, which eventually this is where China heading to. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, you're watching more and more Chinese property developers dropping and dropping and dropping, because their means are much lower than their, or much higher than what they are supposed to be paying. So, or can bear. So that explains that, and be ready to see more and more developers coming in until you see a full-on complete market crash, like housing crash in all of the country of China. And I feel like at this point, we're them and us, we know that the inevitable is happening. It's just about who's going to go through it first. And that's why I feel like we're constantly getting a propped up market when in reality everything is down to crap. Like we're screwed, in other words. All right, 1 second. Let's see, who else do we have in here? Mrs. Gloria, nice to see you in here. We got Brian C. How are you, brother? Droobs White. Yo, what's good, fam? What's good with you, brother? I'm glad to see you guys all in here. Like I said, I'm just getting a quick one in before the market open, because I have to be traveling tomorrow to Gatlinburg. I'm gonna be there for a week. you know, it's the best time I feel like that I chose this, because vacation time is after post MOAS, but during these times there's a lot of anxiety happening all throughout of these announcements and all that kind of stuff. So I need this good week, or roughly about, let's say about 5 days. I'll be back next weekend, so just so that I would be Saturday and Sunday off as well, so it'll just be 7 days total. I mean, honestly, I don't even know why I think like that, because either way I'm off from anything, unless I obviously have to go in and figure something out for the restaurant and see if they need anything. There was something else I think I wanted to cover. Let's stop the music for a second. And let's close this guy down. Look here. This is the interview we're going to be reacting to.
He wrote a big report on securing America's supply.
Can you guys hear this guy very good?
Of critical metals. Duncan, welcome to Kitco.
Thanks for having me.
We will talk about the findings of your report a little bit later, but maybe
this guy, by the way, guys, his name is Duncan Wood. He's a genius in what we're going to be covering, in all about like precious metals, geographical stuff, everything. Mr. Dibs Patel, nice to see you in here. Backyard boogie. We'll catch you in the backyard, brother. Goodish. Okay. Does it need to be louder for these people right here? Let me know, guys, in the comment section if it needs to be louder. Actually, here, it is loud. Or is it loud, too loud?
Another strong jobs report, and Hekla acquires Alexco. You're listening to Kitco Roundtable. I'm your host, Michael McRae. Paul Harris is out, but with us is Duncan Wood. He's Vice President for Strategy and New Initiatives at the Wilson Center, a Washington,
so, is it too loud, guys? Let me know.
Think tank.
If the
people, you wrote a big report on securing America's
sound?
Supply of critical metals. Duncan, welcome to Kitco.
Good. Perfect. I don't want anybody to say, I barely can hear the guy or something, because this guy, when he speaks right here, you're going to gravitate to what he's saying, because this guy holds a PhD and he's just the real deal in this whole thing. So if you want to listen to people, you want to listen to people who are very educated into that realm. So let's kick this off, guys.
Thanks for having me.
We will talk about the findings of your report a little bit later, but maybe tee us up. Why did you write the report and what were you addressing?
Well, the reason behind the report was just to try to complement the work that was already underway from the Biden administration on the subject of how to strengthen and make more resilient America's supply chains in a whole range of areas. So, in addition to critical minerals, we're looking at semiconductors, electric vehicles, and the healthcare sector. And what we're trying to do is to engage with stakeholders from across the spectrum, from the private sector, from government, and from civil society think tanks, to try to come up with novel and innovative policy solutions for the challenges that we've faced, not just since the beginning of COVID, but really in the context of major geopolitical changes that are underway in the global economy.
Let's have that discussion, Duncan, because that's really been a...
So just so you guys, I can prep you guys a little bit for this. This interview is gonna, to the overall public, to at least to what we all know or feel is happening, this is gonna more make the case of why China is overtaking us as far as the US in global dominance from a resourceful, essential resources perspective, which is apparently where we're heading into this future. But when this interview is over, I'm going to tell you guys something that it's not very, very, very advertised, but it's something that works to our advantage. And you guys, I'll let you guys know after the interview. But after this interview, you're going to be like, okay, wow. Yeah, I see why publicly it is announced that China is overtaking us in the race for dominance, global dominance. So let's keep going with this.
strong theme that has been running, I think, for about the last 2 years, whether you see it addressed in Linus or maybe some of the other major producers in the critical metal space. First, though, let's talk about macro, and that's jobs report. It was a strong one. The key non-farm payrolls came in at 372,000 versus market expectations of 250,000. That follows from last month's strong job numbers. Gold dipped a bit. U.S. Treasury yields rose. The rising of the U.S. bond yields late this week suggests that the marketplace is putting inflation worries back closer to the front burner of the marketplace and maybe on par with recession worries. As of this recording, noon on a Friday, gold is in the mid-1750s. Arguing against the inflation thesis was oil, which dropped below $95 a barrel this week, although oil is now back above $100 a barrel. Copper, well, it's just been really terrible, losing nearly $1 this past month. It is currently trading at $3.50 a pound. It hit a 17-month low, again, a 17-month low earlier this week. The big mining news.
You see, guys, how so far, like this, just this general news that this reporter is announcing, this should tell you how they use the media, like how they publicize the pumping and the dumping of the market, like the whole jobs report of it coming back at the 300,000 while it exceeded expectations. This is why you would see some days, like in this week when we were going green, everything was in the market was going green, because they will say that this is related to this news. But then again, you also would see news that says, oh, gold is down, but it's back up to 100. And then copper is all-time low. And this is when you would see, and they say that the recession is in the front of us now. All the expectations are all induced. So like he's basically saying, or the regulators are saying that now all the fear about recession is at least has been incorporated within this market trading. So in other words, they're saying that where we at right now should be the bottom. So are we going to believe them? Personally, for me, everybody has their own opinion. Personally, for me, that's a big pile of rubbish. All that stuff changes daily. So we're going to see. This is interesting.
News was Hecla Mining acquiring Alexco Resources. Hecla touts its North American roots, separating it from other silver miners with operations predominantly in Latin America. Alexco is based in the Yukon and started operations about 2 years ago. Investors didn't love the deal, shaving 11% from Hecla when the deal was announced. Rio 2 was dealt a blow when its Phoenix Gold project in Chile failed its environmental assessment. The company said it's evaluating its options. The company was down 70% this month. And some good news, Asante poured its first gold at Bibilani mine in Ghana. It's eyeing production of 175,000 ounces over the next 12 months. Duncan, I'd like to bring you back. You authored Mosaic Approaching, looking at critical metals. There's been a buildup in concern around commodities and materials with overly concentration in one country. Let's start with principles first, Duncan. What is the criteria? What makes a commodity like rare earths, or making a service, or I should say a material like semiconductors? What makes them vulnerable?
Well, the vulnerabilities that we can see in the supply chain for critical minerals at this point in time are largely due to the fact that demand is increasing very, very rapidly for a lot of these critical minerals, largely because of the energy transition that we're seeing taking place, and in particular because of the ambitious plans from the auto industry to increase the sales of electric vehicles. The second perspective, or the second reason why they're vulnerable, is because in many countries, such as the United States, the extractive industries have been neglected for many, many years. And so whilst there has been significant development of resources, in-ground resources in other parts of the world, here in the United States and many other countries, in particular in Europe, we just haven't seen that same level of investment. The third reason, and this follows directly from the second, is that we're seeing supply in the form of extraction, but also in the form of processing and refining of these critical minerals, highly concentrated in a small number of countries. We're all aware of the importance that a country like the Democratic Republic of the Congo has in the production of cobalt, for example. But when we begin to look at where minerals such as cobalt, lithium, nickel are being refined and processed so they really can become useful for the manufacturing process, we see that China is playing a major role there in terms of concentrating getting a stranglehold on the supply of those goods to manufacturing.
Doug.
So I'm pretty sure you guys understood what he was saying. So also in other words, he's saying that all these resources of these essentials of these metals like cobalt, for example, as he mentioned, are produced, or their source is somewhere else, like the Congo, but China is the person that is taken over, or like they have put a grip on most of these essentials to be like refined over in China. So like they take most of that stuff, or they basically import all that stuff, and then they refine it, and then they put it out and obviously induce it either into their country or other regions by obviously selling the refined product.
And there's a lot that I want to address in there. Maybe first we could just talk about the top criteria. The criteria you mentioned at the top was around energy transition. But I think you did mention semiconductors in there. I just am interested in once again kind of defining the criteria around vulnerability, for instance. I'm going to throw a flip example. So, for instance, you would have cocoa that's concentrated in one country, or you might have vanilla that is going to be concentrated in Madagascar, for instance, as well. But again, is there particularly something that about these industries, or something that is actually kind of that?
Just a fun note, by the way, guys, whenever you drink coffee or you go and order something like French vanilla, coffee with French vanilla or something, whenever you hear French vanilla, it's so funny. You guys have to know this small little detail. France do not have any vanilla in its territory, on its own land. What they did is they obviously, when you heard the guy say Madagascar, they basically control that region and they get all the vanilla from there. But then when they get it, they will put on it saying French vanilla. So yeah, there's no such thing as French vanilla. They just basically, added the French to it by taking it from somewhere else, and then called it, French vanilla. So I think it's hilarious for me. It's good for history for you guys also to know.
That's making these making either semiconductors or critical metals being identified as being strategic or being vulnerable.
Yeah, I think it's because of their applications to key technologies that really are essential for a modern economy to be competitive. It's also because of the heavy overlay of geopolitical concerns within there. And a lot of the work that we do at the Wilson Center, I've developed an approach to understanding supply chain thinking. It's been an evolution over the past decade in particular, from a focus just on value, which is trying to cut costs and getting things just in time production, etc. Which has been made possible by the existence of a globalized economy. From there, we've seen the gradual but steady introduction of what I would call values: environmental standards, social standards, governance standards, the classic ESG package. But then also looking at questions of national security, particularly in the aftermath of 9/11 and all the steps that have been taken to try to make supply chains more secure in terms of knowing what's coming through them. And then, of course, we had security from disruption of supply during COVID, where we saw a lot of the logistics breaking down. And then after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, we're seeing the injection of geopolitics. And of course, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is one element in the story. What most people here in the United States are much more concerned about is what happens if we do get heightened tensions between the United States and China, or if we were to see an economic decoupling between the two countries brought on, for example, by Chinese aggression against the island of Taiwan. What would that actually mean for the flows of all of these goods that we depend upon to manufacture smartphones, TVs, electric vehicles, etc., but which are so heavily concentrated in a country like China?
Well, straight from the dragon's mouth. as you guys can see, we're shifting in the world now to, obviously, as the civilization is advancing, we're realizing that these elements like the cobalt, uranium, so many things are needed. And the problem with it is that they're very concentrated in the source. Like China have taken a step ahead than all of the world, specifically us, the United States. Excuse me. And in that direction. And they've done this like at least 10 years ago. They started this, or even way before that, a decade ago, in this movement. And now we are here. And as you guys heard him say, so like what we're worried about now, or what he's saying, is that the West, specifically United States, are dependent on this, and all the world is dependent on this, but most of it is concentrated in China. So if we were to become actual enemies, if China was to invade Taiwan, which is at this point inevitable, what would that mean for us? This is why you've seen a huge price, like up to the upside, and for example, used items like used cars. A lot of you know this, like, or you've probably seen a friend who had a truck that was used, like that's a 2017 or 18 truck, and it's used, and its value right now is probably even more than you when you even purchased it back then. Like it's $5,000 or $8,000 more valued. Why? Because of all these essentials in them, is controlling production. And this is why this month, for example, we had somebody else besides Tesla sell more electric cars. You know, for I think it was the first time. Like there's this electric company backed by no one other than Warren Buffett. He's actually a huge investor in it. I think he's the highest investor in it as well. But it's called BYO or BYD. Let me see real quick. Which one is it? I remember back when I was looking at the electric vehicles back in the when I was doing like NIO and Lee and Tesla, like, you know, doing a research on electric vehicles, and if I wanted to invest in anything, which one would it be? Is it BYD? I think it's BYD. Let's see. Is it it? No, it's not. Somebody probably in here might know it, but it starts with a BY. We'll get it. We'll update it. But yeah, besides that point, it's shifting all the access to these natural resources are, because we're not producing it here, at least for a certain extent, and we'll get to that at the end of this interview. And I'll tell you guys my take on that part as far as for these resources. For now, most of it is concentrated in China, and the worries are, if we were to become direct enemies, we're not going to no longer depend. Obviously, we no longer depend on Russia because we have all the sanctions on them. And what kind of resources they provide as far as oil and natural gas, especially to Europe. Most of Europe, if not all of Europe, are getting their gas straight from Russia. So let's keep going with this interview, and we'll go.
Can you talk about the underinvestment piece, Duncan? So there's, we've heard for several years now, Belt and Road Initiative. We've seen the investment that China has been making, and then also, you just don't have to look at. You just can look at the mining indexes to see how unloved commodities have been for all this time. What's been the difference between China and its investments have been making and investments that have been coming out of North America in terms of commodities?
So again, I'm going to come back to sort of that supply chain paradigm and the evolution of it, which is that for many years, here in the United States, and I think it's true in Canada and many other Western countries, in particular in Europe, you would see that there has been an emphasis on the high value added portion of the supply chain. In other words, research and design, putting together the final finished product and selling it on into the market. What we've neglected was the sort of initial part of the supply chain, where we get the goods out of the ground and do basic processing and refining of those goods. The Chinese, on the other hand, have a much more holistic and integrated approach to supply chain thinking. They understand that they need to control not just the high value added portions, but the lower value added portions at the beginning of the supply chain, if they're really going to have control over their strategic destiny, as it were. And so what we're seeing right now is a recognition, far too late, sadly, but a recognition that we've kind of dropped the ball for many, many years. And now is a time when we actually need to get involved in the extractive industries. The problem with that is that whilst many people recognize that we need to focus much more on extraction and processing, there are so many obstacles in place that prevent us from doing that rapidly. Here in the United States, for example, when we look at permitting in the mining sector, it takes on average 7 to 10 years to get a permit to open a mine. Compare that with Australia or Canada, where it takes on average 2 years to get the permits. And you can see why there has been underinvestment in the extractive industry.
First of all, this guy is so, like I said, like when you listen to him, he's very gravitating to listen to him because he speaks with so much confidence and knowledge on the whole sector. Now, specifically right there, you heard him say Canada and Australia. I want you guys to remember those two, as he said, that we're so behind on them because one, they get permits much sooner, like 2 to 3 years. They could have a mine completely registered and ready to go and to operate, versus here takes 7 to 10 years. Well, that is obviously a disadvantage. I'm gonna link to you guys why it's very important, the fact that it's Canada and Australia, as he just mentioned at the end of the interview. So stay tuned for that part. But remember those two countries being more advanced, like they have more of an advantage on things like of the mining world for these essentials much sooner than the US itself. And that's very important versus going against the Chinese interest and all this topic that we're talking about. So stay tuned to the end.
Now, there's movement on this issue. We're seeing legislation being put before Congress that will essentially represent a new approach to mining law. There will be attempts by the executive branch to streamline the permitting process. But there's a real problem here, which is that there's only so much the federal government can do because of the division of powers between federal, state, and local governments here in the United States. But also the culture of litigiousness in the United States, and of course the presence of NIMBYism. And the combination of...
All right. Very, very, very big words for us here, right? I don't know if any of you in here knows what NIMBYism is, but NIMBYism in explanation is when an entity, like let's say the United States, they know the importance of these things, but they don't want to do these things in their own backyard. So they would go, for example, to Congo and say, hey, we know that these things are essential and we need them, but I don't want to dig these things and do all this digging and all that stuff here in my own backyard because it will have a lot of hazardous effects, whether radiation effects or whatever, on my own people. So therefore, but this is still essential, we need it. So I rather do it somewhere else. That's essentially the definition of NIMBYism. Let me just, before I continue going on, let me just say hi to Arthur Martin. How are you, brother? Nice to see you in here. And Brian C is saying my 2010 Tacoma is still worth close to 15,000 and it's 12 years old. I also just bought an 07 F250 diesel truck for 22K. Used cars values are insane. Yes, sir. Corbin Dallas, nice to see you in here, brother. Nice. Hopefully you're having a great evening. I like where your head is at, AB. Well, thank you. I'm trying to keep everybody's head, guys, at the macro levels of what is happening besides just our AMC, because when you understand what's happening all around, you can get a better picture on one, when things are really going to drop. So that way you can temper your expectations, because yes, we are AMC, yes, we are GME, yes, we are the meme stocks, and we are within the stock market, but that's an atom within the whole realm, and we'll talk about atoms in a second. But more importantly, when you see all these events and you keep your eyes and your head tracking these things, you would kind of sort of get an idea on when possibly could we see everything deteriorate. And that's at that point, that's where we come in. And that's my personal opinion, guys. That's where we come in, because when all that stuff, everything around us fall and deteriorate on a global macro event level scale, that's when our stocks would have, like, obviously the whole everything will, the market will be crashing, and that's when we will be on the opposite end. Instead of being in the market, we would be for a certain small period amount of time on the opposite end of the market, because it's like a kind of like a seesaw. We're in the same, we're leveled out, this whole everything goes on this side down. This is automatically where we go up, but periodically, only for a certain amount of time, which in other words is called a short squeeze. And then obviously the prices will level back down, and then we would be, again, once the market is all leveled out, we would all be in the same realm once again. And at that point, every investor would be looking at what do you want to invest in moving forward, because the markets are all leveled now. This is really important because so far you're forming an understanding on what is really, really important to us. So a smart individual, once they invested, like once upon a time, I forgot who was it that said this, but the first person to put water in a bottle and actually sell it was probably the smartest individual on the planet. Why? Because those are essentials. Like, they're not wants. You can live, for example, in these days, it will be very hard without a car, right? But you can't live without water. You need water, right? So if everybody is buying their water because, water is contaminated depending on the area they're in, now you're talking about somebody who can corner that market. And there are some theories, conspiratorial theories about the Rothschilds and, owning a third of the water supply throughout the globe, so therefore they could go ahead and influence a lot of political rulings and governments, in fact, because they can make a government go against a government, in other words, war, simply because they control a particular stream that is very needed. And that's why people are worried about in the future, oh my God, with all this contamination, what's going to happen with oxygen? I've even seen some people draw out an explanation or reality that at some point we're going to be buying oxygen tanks because the air is going to be too contaminated around. Now, whether you buy into all that crap or not, that stuff is already in a small beginning stage of it. There are places where they sell oxygen tanks, and could you imagine if at some point we get to a life where you need to carry your tank with you everywhere you go because of too much radiation around, or whatever the case may be, perhaps post a World War III or something. Again, I wouldn't want to wish for any of that stuff, but then again, like I said, where there is money to be made, the most profitable business is always going to be business and essential needs. That's why you see a plethora of restaurants around, and the only restaurants that lose are the restaurants that are just bad. Now, what else kills restaurants in these times is the heightened inflation, which means access to all these resourceful goods are more expensive on the distributor. Therefore, they also tick on prices onto the receiver, which is the middle entity, the restaurants, or before it gets to even to the household. And by us getting it for more, now in order for us to stay operational, we have to raise our prices as well to accommodate and the induction of all that inflation. Now, what does that mean ultimately for the consumer? That they also have to pay more now to get something that they were already used to or relied upon. Everybody needs food, everybody needs water, and all that kind of stuff, and you see the high the inflation and all these things, and obviously the manufacturers of these things are ultimately the true winners because they could still get their profits if they were able to export 25 boxes previously before pandemic. After the pandemic, now these things are production is down 50%, let's say, for example. So we'll say 17 and a half barrels are shipped out. They still want to get access to their same profits previously. So what they do is they mark up the price so that it can still have that same income effect to them. However, the production is less, so someone at the receiving end is going to get less but still pay what they used to pay for it previously, which means they have to mark up their price so that even the receiver after that point, which is the consumer at this point, would have to be paying more, and they would have to even pay more to get what they were used to before. So it's a trickling effect, and it's important again to understand all that stuff from the big picture to be able to bring it down to the small picture, and eventually be also able to relate it, one, to the stock market, two, to the plays that we're in, because that would give you a time frame as in, okay, like we're still in this frame of kind of like a Cold War where this versus this versus this, when we're waiting for when one of these two goes into something, like for example, China invading Taiwan, and now we got to be on the aggression phase where we have to do our thing and protect Taiwan, and obviously the other allies jumping in, which eventually would form a unfortunate case here, a World War III formation, because China automatically is going to be align themselves with Russia. And at that point, you're going to have their close countries like India, who had many disputes with China, by default having to go in but kind of stay neutral. But eventually everybody gets drawn into a world war, right? And that's why you see the BRICS versus the G6. And it's a crazy big world. But once you align your interests in all these things, then you would be able, it will be much clearer down here in the smaller picture, which is in our trading in the market. On top of all that, you also would know what are these essentials, and post MOAS, once you know what these essentials are, you know we're moving toward them. You know that they're only going to go so much more in value in the coming days and years. So it's kind of more like of a sure trade, or a blessed trade, because as long as you find the right company that has an edge over all the other companies in that essential resource, like for example uranium, or cobalt, these things, once you find and do your DD and find the right source, or the entity or the person that has the biggest concentration or hand over all of it, then you would know, like, okay, well, that's what I want to invest in, because this is going to be the next 10 years, in the next 5 to 10 years, this is going to make me beyond wealthy, because the need for them is going to be way more than even gold. And it's realistic. I mean, uranium is more expensive than gold. I think like gold is like even like half of the evaluation of uranium, but you can't access uranium. It's only for certain entities, and you can't just like, oh, okay, let's go dig here and get uranium out, because obviously you could use these things for crazy weaponry purposes, especially if it gets influenced or induced with uranium-235 and it gets completely manufactured that way. Then now you're talking about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You're talking about Little Boy, which is what that nuclear bomb was made out of when the U.S. dropped it back in August of 1947, 45. I think it was August 17, 1945, if I'm not mistaken. So if we have any historians in the house, you can correct me. It's either August 17th of 1945 or August 17th of 1947. I think I'm leaning more toward 1947. Just a side info for you guys. But once you know who produces most of this, who has a strong grip on it, You know who's to invest in for the future. And that way you would know that you're going into something that no matter what, human civilization as a whole needs this. And now I could hold this because this is only going to go up in value. Let's continue.
Those last two factors really does make it very, very difficult to streamline the regulatory process in a holistic way.
Aren't we also, is it also just a problem by, there just being too much population down in the US? I mean, it seems like mines get developed if they're kind of out of sight and out of mind, for instance. So I think it's something that are kind of in distant locales, or at least it's going to be a place where, people are very much used to mining. And I think of Quebec, for instance.
I think both of those factors are really important. Density of population matters a great deal. But, here in the United States, there are still many parts of the country which actually are quite sparsely populated. But, look at Canada. Canada has, what is it? I forget what the percentage is, 80% of the population within 500 miles of the US border. And then you've got all the rest of that enormous territory. But of course, Canada has had to deal with a lot of these issues, in particular in dealing with First Nations and making sure that community rights are respected. In Australia, again, a sparsely populated country and continent, you have less local opposition, but it still exists. So I think that, it's not that this is easy to do. It's that, I think countries like Australia and Canada have found a way to do it. And part of the reason why.
He's not going to say this, but I will be more than happy to say this. Reason why Canada or Australia were able to do these things, as he's saying, is because their governments were able to overstep so many of the rights of the citizens, of obviously their respective citizens. So we know what they were doing in Australia as far as the camps and everything throughout COVID. We know what Canada was doing, obviously, and it's the regime that is having right now. I'm not going to say my thoughts on it because, again, this is an investing channel, not a political one for the most part. But at the end of the day, he's not going to say these things. He's a Canadian and obviously a professional, so he can't say why. But in other words, I could tell you this without having to take any political sides, that those two countries that are far exceeding us in this realm, they were able to overstep many of their citizens' rights in order for them to be there. That's why the whole idea of NIMBYism, once I said again, over there in Canada or in Australia, they're not going about it that way, or even in China, they're not going about it in that sense. They're like, hey, if there is a resource that we need in this land, we're going to dig it up and we're going to get it out because it costs money and it brings resourceful, obviously, benefits to us. Versus where here in America, you would have a community, let's say they find a reservoir of cobalt in the middle of, let's say in Illinois, in the state of Illinois. And you got all the residents there in those community comes out and says, no, we don't want you to come and do this in our backyard. You're going to cause our children this. It's going to contaminate our waters. It's going to do this. While that's a good thing, geopolitically or in a macro level, it's also something that works against us because we're no longer producing these things. We're more obviously about the rights. So at this point, it's harder to move toward this direction or this direction because you would have to obviously go with the Constitution. And that's why I love our Constitution. As I said many times before, I love our Constitution. It's just the players we have in the game are ruining it for the great Constitution that it is, But let's carry on with this.
Is because of the second point that you made, which is that it's built into the culture. Canada sees itself as at least in part, a natural resource-based economy, and that's a very, very important part of national identity. Here in the United States, we've lost that. Mining is seen here as being a 19th century dirty industry that pollutes rivers and destroys the earth. And who wants to do mining? And then all of a sudden, given what's been taking place over the last couple of years, we've realized, but in fact, in order for us to meet our climate goals, in order for us to meet our national security and geopolitical goals, we actually do need to guarantee access to these critical minerals.
You've mentioned Canada, you've mentioned Australia. Which country has done a strategy around strategic metals that you see that have done well or fairly well? There was an announcement from Canada, for instance, some tax incentives that they were putting in. Australia certainly introduced, it certainly identified what are the key resource areas for critical metals.
I think you're right. I think both of Canada and Australia are taking the positive steps in this regard. The United States is moving, albeit very, very slowly. According to the latest version of the Defense Production Act, which was passed in response to the Ukraine crisis, another 500 million, slightly more than $500 million were pushed towards the development of the critical mineral supply chain here in the United States. That's a tiny drop in the bucket of what's actually needed, of course. When you look at what the Europeans are doing, the Europeans have actually moved further and faster than the United States, pulling together a more coordinated approach to securing their supply chains. Perhaps I think the most important step recently, and this happened just a couple of weeks ago, was the creation of the Mineral Security Partnership, where you have Canada, the United States, the European countries, Japan, and Australia working together as almost in the form of a buyer's cartel to try to secure access to critical minerals from around the world, and then also to make sure that they cover the requirements in terms of processing and refining of those.
You guys see this? This is extremely important, and he mentioned it as close or as close to politically he's safe to say. He called it a cartel, like this. In other words, the G6. They're you can talk about Canada, Australia, Europe, most of Europe, China, not China, sorry, Japan. And what these entities are doing, since we are lacking, for example, access to most of these resources, we know that these countries are doing the same thing, and we're trying to secure the resource for ourselves or for these nations, and whoever is within this, you could also receive the blessings. This is why the BRICS is kind of like doing their own thing, and they have a different kind of infrastructure and access to this. They have kind of an edge on it, but at the end of this interview, I'll tell you what's the US's backup plan, I think, at least.
Critical minerals between them and then selling to each other. That has real potential. It's going to require ongoing work and collaboration between the countries, not just a one and done. But at least I think you begin to see the creation of a more coordinated response from Europe, the United States, Canada, etc., to the China challenge on critical minerals.
When did this come to a head, Duncan? I'm trying to go back. I mean, this predates what happened with Ukraine-Russia conflict, where we were looking at suddenly our oil looked a real threat. It seems to have kind of come out of, I would say, kind of in the pandemic and kind of during the Trump administration. But was there any particular trigger or any particular event where we started really focusing on awareness of this issue?
Well, it's interesting because the concern over supply chains, and in particular over critical minerals, you can trace it back to the Obama administration when they were looking at the minerals that you'd need for the energy transition. Then during the Trump administration, where there was a much more of an economic nationalist approach to trade and foreign economic policy, we began to see that focus as well, in particular on questions like semiconductors, where they saw that the United States was becoming vulnerable to Chinese dominance. And then during the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen increased awareness of the really dangerous implications of a breakdown of the supply chain. But I think that the big triggering moment for the United States has been the announcement by companies like General Motors that they're going to move to 100% of their vehicle fleet being electric in the next 20 years or so. And of course, that target of 50% announced by the Biden administration, 50% of vehicles being sold should be electric by 2030. That means that there's just a huge jump in demand for these critical minerals over the next next 8 years. And
you heard that, guys? with because now we're looking at what the regulations are going to be, and we all remember when Biden did come in and say that, hey, by 2030 50% of the cars needs to be electric, which means now if we have to shift from fossil fuel based vehicles, the regular cars that we're dealing with now on a daily basis, now we're shifting over to the electric sector within at least the next 8 years. There has to be 50% of the cars have to be in electric, which means if it's going to be electric, those resources we're talking about, uranium, cobalt, nickel, all these resources, and there will be more that we'll talk about, are going to be extremely more high in demand, and you're going to be more like, okay, well, if I'm an investor, and this is me, again, I'm not giving an advice to anybody at all, never in this channel, but this is for me. When I see that this is what we're moving toward in policy and as a global effort as well, that tells me that, this is probably something I need to be a part of in its takeoff or in its infancy stages, because clearly this is what's going to be the world all cornered around or centered around in the next coming years. And it doesn't matter inflation to me, or at this point, it doesn't matter what is happening. In fact, if any other pandemics happen and markets shut down, these essentials will only be way more highly valuable because the production is halting, like what happened in COVID-19. No workers were going, production was halted, which means we're going to be operating out of the reserves. Hypothetically speaking, if we were to have another pandemic, and again, it's low chance, but who's to say that that wouldn't happen this winter or whatever, in the next year or two? If it was, then even in the infancy stage right now for these metals, I still consider it infancy stages, it's going to be way more valued at certain times, especially in an all shutdown, because the whole globe needs those essentials, but yet we're operating off of the reserves at that point, and that makes the spikes go up in them because we need them. We have less access to them, which makes it scarce, which means people are going to be paying more to have access to those until the foreseeable future, which is huge, right? Let's continue.
If you look at what is actually out there being produced today, and you compare that with what the demand will be in 2030, if the United States does go to 50% of the vehicle fleet being sold that is electric, then there simply isn't enough out there in the world right now to cover that. So we need massive and very rapid development of new resources and processing and refining.
What metals are the most worrisome, Duncan?
Well, I mean, it all depends upon what your definition of critical minerals is. In the study that we conducted, we were incomplete and we didn't cover everything. But we looked at lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare earths, and we also included copper, because copper is such an important element in terms of electrification. And when we see what's going to be happening in terms of building out the charging network, when we see what's going to be happening in terms of the transition to renewable energy, copper will play a critical role there. But the really big problems in the short term that I see, short to medium term, are to do with lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earths. And those are all areas where China holds a significant lead over the United States in terms of securing the supply chain.
Is there going to be anything different this before, Duncan? Because we have heard these stories about critical metals and just the concentration of rare earths. I mean, that goes back to early last decade, and then we had a run up in rare earth during that particular time. Is there something changed this time?
Yeah, I think it's that we now have a much clearer idea of what demand is going to be in the next decade. We also have definite policy commitments on the part of the current US administration, also in the European Union. But it's those corporate commitments which have been driven as much as anything by the preferences, the demands of shareholders and investors. So that ESG component once again coming in there. And I think that that's what really is different this time around. You know, when I look at the debate here in Washington, it's extraordinary how many different groups are coming together. You know, it's a bipartisan issue up on Capitol Hill when it's almost impossible to find any bipartisan issues up there. You're seeing business as well as environmental groups talking about the importance of doing this. And there's just got this incredible upswell of pressure on policymakers to come up with solutions for it. So I think that that's what's really different this time around, is that we're finally getting a handle on the urgency of it. Does that mean that policymakers are going to respond effectively? Who knows? You know, just a classic example from another sphere is what's taking place in semiconductors. For the past 9 months, we've had legislation in place in the US Congress to provide $52 billion in funding for semiconductors. But the bills or the legislation in the House of Representatives is different from the legislation in the Senate, US Senate. And they haven't been able to reconcile them and actually make the money flow for the past 9 months. That's problematical. The fact is that we have a political system here which faces serious constraints, and that really limits our ability to react effectively and rapidly.
Duncan, I think you missed one factor, and that would be Linus has had a couple of quarters where they've had a nice profit. So, you know, with the support of rare earth prices. So that also is driving some interest and driving some investment into the rare earth space. Maybe let me just let you just finish on this point, though, Duncan, was what do you see that is concrete that's really positive in the space right now, that you know, there's going to be some hope that things are strategic?
So, I mean, in addition to the fact that we're seeing so many people recognizing the importance of it, we are beginning to see movement in terms of providing funding for the sector. We're also seeing an extraordinary investment by the private sector in technologies designed to take better advantage of the critical minerals that we have access to. So, for example, battery technologies that reduce the total amount of cobalt needed in a battery by substituting for manganese, for example. Those kind of technologies, I think, are going to help us bridge the gap, maybe push the deadline out a little bit further, where we reach the point where we don't have enough critical minerals. I think we're also going to have to see a certain degree of pragmatism here. You know, it's great that we have a target of 2030 for 50% of the vehicle fleet being electric. I think that we're probably going to have to push out a little bit more than that. Another piece of good news is that we're looking at the potential for recycling of battery metals. And we know that the average battery in an electric vehicle will last for about 10 years. So once we get to that level of 50% of the vehicle fleet being electric, 10 years from that point, we'll then have to have effective recycling processes in place, which involves a lot of infrastructure development that will enable us to take advantage of that resource that is already in the system. And because we have at least 10 years, probably more like 15 to 18 years to create that, I'm seeing a lot of folks in the space now bringing in investment, bringing in ideas, new technologies, and I'm seeing that there is a move towards creating public policy that will help that process. So I think we're going to see over the next 2 decades a partnership between the extractive industries and the recycling sector that will enable us to somehow put it all together and meet the targets that we need.
Let's turn to our number of the week. Guest goes first. Duncan, what's your number?
Okay, so my number is 42. And 42, of course, is famous because of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is, it's the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything. But most importantly, it is, for me, it is the number of times that the demand for lithium will grow by the year 2040 over 2020 levels. So 42 times the demand for lithium by 2040 compared to 2020. And we all know that lithium is everywhere, but of course its concentrations and its quality as a resource varies enormously. So we're going to see massive investment into the lithium sector. Not all of those projects are going to be profitable. Not all those projects are going to be successful, but we will see that there'll be huge amounts of lithium flowing through the system. So
as you guys can see right here, right now, for me as an investor, what I'm picking up from this is, okay, well, if by 2040 the estimates are saying that like a resource like lithium the demand for it is gonna grow 42 times in this next 20 years. Now I'm concentrating some part of my thinking towards, let's see who's really, because he also mentioned obviously not all those projects will be successful, but at that point as an investor, that's where your DD comes in, and that's where you look and see who's cornering that industry, which entity has its hands or its fingers all over it, versus some new similar to like Tesla, for example. You have Tesla hands all over the electric world. Now you got many other people, because obviously there is a big demand in electric vehicles. So you have many more entities coming in, like you have Mullen, Polster, so many, Frisker. It's over, like, and you got Neo, Lee, XPev, BYD. It's crazy the amounts. But for me, if I know that this is something, this is why this is the perfect example, and I need this an investment. If I want to invest in the electric realm, then obviously I know that it's Tesla. Now Tesla, obviously being the leader in that industry, you see it induced into that market cap or in that price of the stock. But if obviously lithium is still something that didn't take off yet, and this is why this is was an important interview that I wanted to share with you guys, or listen and react to with you guys, is because now you get to see what's next and be on the forestep of what's next with a good step, like a very strong step in, based on your DD, where you want to invest your money, especially at post MOAS, stuff like that. Well, guess what? If I heard something like this, and it's backed by obviously people like Duncan Wood, and they say, for example, stuff like 42 times the amount of need that's going to be, or the demand for lithium is going to grow from now within the next 10 to 15 to 20 years. Like, oh wow, okay, I just need to find out now who's the godfather in this, and let's take a ride with them, because they're gonna grow even bigger and bigger in value within the next 20 years, maybe perhaps up, who knows, 40 times higher. And that right there, ladies and gentlemen, is how an investor thinks on a macro level, versus just things, that are, versus if you were a day trader, for example, all this stuff is pointless to you because you're going about it on that day. Okay, what's going on? What's moving? Volume? Okay, perfect. It's in this and this and this. It could be all in different sectors. It could be in the energy sector. It could be in the tech sector. Everywhere. But as a day trader, you just trading the volume, and you just trading the stock. You don't even know, most of the times. For me, I don't even know what industry that stock is in. I'm just operating off the technicals on it. And obviously it's just a day trade. So I'm in and I'm out. So it's different than when you're thinking on a macro level and you're thinking for long term investing, especially with the times that we're in, and in the times that we're heading into still as well. Now that I see all this, and now all you guys that are still in here, or whoever also watches this after, gets to formulate an idea on, okay, I might have some interest in this. How do I go about investing in something like this? Or like, for example, lithium. And that's where your DD comes in, and you start that venture. And once you incorporate this way of thinking, guys, you're always going to be thinking, one, as institutional investors, even though you're retail, but you're going to be thinking like an institutional investor. And this way you can further flourish in the investing realm for obviously years to come, and not just be held in a phenomena or a phenomena event like meme stock saga, because we know that this is an event. with all the meme stocks. It doesn't matter which one you're in. And when they're over, you're not going to have more, trends like this, because I'm assuming obviously that the system is going to be finding covers to cover all that, because again, the buy and hold has been the worst or the scariest thing for the other side. And they're all this time we've been in is so that how can they break that hold mindset and that pattern. Buy is okay. They want you to buy as much, but they don't want the idea of holding. That's why it's going to be very important for you to also, besides meme stocks and jumping in the pit with everyone else, because after this MOAS goes through, hopefully it goes through at some point, you're going to have a time frame where, you're going to be, I hope that you're not going to be one of those people that goes around the net or social media looking for the next hype. Because at that point, you're just walking into a trap and most likely will lose all your investments. You need to do your DD. You need to look at what is going to be in demand. It's always about what's in demand. I don't care how much somebody in the street or in the store wants to sell me something I don't need. It's just a want. Some people could afford it. Some people can't. If you want it, you have it. But when it comes to a time like the times that we're in, people will start shifting their interests away naturally from the wants to the needs. Securing the needs is the most important thing. The days that we're living in, the times that we live in, you're talking about vehicles, you're talking about a home, you're talking about food, you're talking about water, you're talking about, all these essentials. And as an investor, because the investing never stops, doesn't matter what's happening apparently, even if it's Judgment Day, you're always investing for what. The smart investor will always be investing into what has the potential or what is going to be valued much better in the days to come or the years to come versus where they're going in at that point. Why would they choose that particular stock or that entity is simply, or the company is simply because of the DD that they have done, thinking that this is the where we're going into, and that's going to be very profitable in the next few years or months or days, and therefore you make your step on it. How do you do that? You got to look at the macro events. You got to look at the macro picture of what the world is battling over, and you see this is a war of essential and precious metals. So I agree with people who wants to be in silver and in gold and all this stuff. But honestly, that's when you want to hold physical, because people who invest in gold or silver, but like kind of a stock, an ETF or something like that, you're holding paper. You're trading paper, so you're technically not holding those precious metals. Yet in the same time, you can't go ahead and trade or get uranium and hold it because it's a hazard. And it has radiation in it. Almost all metals do. But the radiation on uranium is different than different metals. So like uranium, it won't hurt you if you hold it, grab it, whatever. It will definitely hurt you if you go ahead and, for example, lick your finger or pick your tooth or whatever, and you didn't wash your hands away from it, then that stuff is inducive into your system, and then it will cause you a lot of issues like radiation exposure. So it's crazy. Let me just finish his interview right
42
here.
number, I think, is the one that really drives me on a daily basis.
Let's keep with the strategic metals theme. My number of the week is 1 billion. Once again, that's 1 billion. Copper producer Codelco has announced it will begin construction on its long-delayed $1 billion desalination plant. That, according to a report from Reuters, it's hoped that the plant, which has been delayed since December 2019, will help Codelco reach its target of reducing freshwater consumption by 60% as Chile enters its second decade of drought. In its note flagging the story, BMO writes that the Chilean copper production struggled to perform over recent years as a result of lower grades, challenging permitting requirements, as well as capex and environmental issues. That's it for us. Follow me at Michael McCrae. That's McCrae with 2 C's. Duncan, how would you like people to get a hold of you?
Please just check out our website. We've got an extraordinary resource there on supply chains. Go to wilsoncenter.org and you'll find it right there on the homepage.
And once again, the name of your report that people can put into their favorite search engine, Duncan?
The mosaic approach.
If you like what you hear, tell a friend. Don't forget to subscribe on behalf of Duncan Wood. And
all right. So it's very we finished basically talking about with this guy, this interview. Hopefully you like this interview, guys, because I want to thank Mr. Duncan Wood, of course, like very, very, very knowledgeable individual, besides holding a PhD in this realm. But now I have personally, and hopefully you guys have formulated an idea that is different, or a different approach of thinking when it comes to this. Because now, while this was all about you particularly investing in the stock market, but you've seen how they were talking about what governments are going to be investing in. And if that's, personally for me, this is where I feel best of going into when I want to put my money, because if these entities, or if this, the whole world, the globe needs this, and their demand is only going to increase into this, then I want to be in on the infancy stages of this, so that when it grows, I'm just taking the ride along with it. I was one of the successful people or smart people to get into it ahead of time. This is what investors like Warren Buffett do. They see what is going to be the good, the cool, the not just the cool, but the necessities in the coming future, or where the the kind of life that we're moving toward, which is going to be like zero emissions and all that stuff. What that, like, once you know that, then you know, okay, that means that's going to create a big interest in this, and that, which means I right now need to get into this, that, because according to the laws, like when Biden went in and said, you know, by 2030, we need to have 50% of the vehicles being electric. At that point, that brings up another point. We need charging stations. There's many stocks that are in charging stations, whether bbgy, and many more. You're gonna have also an increase in demand for these stations, because obviously more cars needing. You can't have like lines that looks like at retail inside of a Walmart on a Black Friday event. Can't have, just so that people can wait to charge their car for 30 minutes or 20 minutes. We anticipate it's even going to be more, as he said, understanding and more profound recycling system into the battery sector, because it is important. Yeah, what, 10 years after you have an electric battery, what that means, when it goes down, you need to go buy another battery for $20,000 or $10,000. I've heard people say it's ludicrous, the value for these batteries. So I'm anticipating that is also going to be much refined for the years and the days to come. So, I need to be a part of this right now when it's very, very low, or at least I have an idea to whenever I secure my capital, who knows from what. I know I have a particular extra entity that I want to invest in. I've never advise any people to do, you know, a particular thing, or I also would never expect people to you know, go ahead and put all their baskets in one thing. But I definitely want to have access to what all this was talked about. I want to have my hands on some of this so that I can, you know, secure myself from more than one base, and this is important. So I hope you guys seen the interest of that interview. Another thing to talk about, hold on, let me see. Hi to Broke Ape. Nice to see you in here, brother. Why is these essentials also important? Look at this. I'm going to tell you guys something. Uranium, and this ties into what I told you to remember, Australia, Canada. When you look for uranium, that this metal, when you look at that resource and you say, okay, since we're not, even though we're doing it, but it's very minimal here in the United States to try to extract uranium, the biggest reservoirs of uranium in the world are in 3 countries right now, the top 3 at least, we'll say. Kazakhstan, if I'm not mistaken, one of those, Kazakhstan or Azerbaijan, I think it's Uzbekistan, one of those 3 countries. They all sound similar, so that's why I forget. And then the other two are Canada and Australia. Even though, we heard Mr. Duncan talk about, how China has a grip on the sources of these elements, uh, or these precious metals. We have the tight firm here is in the United States, something basically he can't also, so he can't say. He got as close to calling it a little mini cartel amongst ourselves. And again, you can't hate the player, you just have to hate the game. At the end of the day, we're allies. So it's in our best interest to all take care of ourselves and our needs for these, to secure these things. So now let's talk about uranium. Why is it important? Well, uranium is made, like, we get nuclear energy throughout the states, and it needs uranium because these things like this nuclear energy do not operate on fossil fuels. So it means it's not going to give out any emissions. It's going to be no carbonic emissions given out because the nuclear power reactors do not use fossil fuel, they use uranium. Now, when you think about it, okay, a lot of people, when they say nuclear, that means they always, like, the thing that pops in the head is the nuclear bombs and weaponry. Well, uranium, what they do is we have about 20 to 25% of our electricity here in the United States is from nuclear powered reactors. We have about, like, I think 93 or 100 of those throughout the United States, probably scattered around like 23 or 28 states. And about 25% of all electricity consumption in the states come from these reactors. And how it works is obviously with uranium. You have they put water into a reactor to steam, and then eventually they will turn the turbine, which eventually creates electricity, and that's how it moves forward. Now, how much uranium reserves are in the globe? You would think about it, you say, there's enough uranium out there, at least as far as we know so far, that could cover us for the next 80 years, but that's not very long, right? This ties into the idea of why it's important that Mr. Duncan Wood said in this interview earlier. How can we go about advancing our technology into having to recycle these resources, so we're not using this resource and kind of like throwing it out, and now we're eating out of that the reserves of what could last us up to the 80 years. So this will happen in this future, as we've seen, and billions of dollars are being invested in these realms. That's huge. Like I said, again, 25% of all electricity in the United States is made from these nuclear powered reactors or factories, where they make, like I explained to you guys, the process of how it goes from this to this. Now, the scary parts is when these minerals or these things are utilized for evil purposes, like weaponry purposes. It will be like the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima was called the Little Boy. It was uranium 235 induced and powered and refined, and obviously was all put in. And what happens is the word nuclear is basically that energy that's in between an atom. Everything in the world is made out of atoms. You yourself, as an adult human, you have about 7 octillion or more of atoms that makes up your whole body. And that's crazy, because that's basically a 7 with what, like 25 or 27 zeros in front of it, and you potentially have more than that. That's just an estimate. And what's obviously inside the atom, and why does it create all this, and like why is so much interest in it, is obviously because there's so much energy inside of every atom. And they were able, some scientists, leading up to the days that we're in now, were able to break the atoms. And that's what happens in these nuclear powered plants, to break these atoms to create that energy that eventually comes into the form of electricity for us. Because in every atom you have basically, you guys already know this, we're not going to do a class of chemistry class or science class, but you guys know the electrons, protons, neutrons. in the atom, and the protons are charged positive, and kind of like a battery. You have the negative, positive, so that's the protons. Then you got the neutrons, which is the negative side, and then you got the electrons. The only positively charged in in those three, because the electrons are circling the other two. So keeping them in. Once this three are split, there is a lot of energy that's making all this happen, those magic happen. So when you divide them, all that energy is dispersed. So for evil purposes, this is where the leading arms war when we had with the USSR, into who's going to create better or more strong nuclear, you know, weapons and stuff like that. And that's unfortunately the case that it was utilized in. Eventually making the scariest one, sorry, it's the cat. Oh, there we go. Perfect timing. She always comes in perfect timing. Out of all the other ones too, she's the one. What's up, baby? Say hi to everyone. Don't lick the camera. Thank you. All right, go down. Down, down. No, cats are not like dogs. They don't listen like this. But anyways, Russia eventually made the scariest bomb, which was back in 1964, I remember, in October, when they tested the what was called the Tsar Bomba. And the Tsar Bomba is basically a hydrogen bomb. And that's obviously a different realm. And according to them, they only had one to test. They never made any more. I don't know if I want to really trust them with this. I doubt it. But when they tested it, it was 3 times stronger and worse than the one that was dropped in Japan, that we dropped in Japan, little boy. So imagine 3 times worse. That's something that obviously can't be utilized at all. I mean, that's a life-ending kind of thing, and we only seen video footage of it when the Russians released it. Like, what was it, like back in the late 60s or the 70s? And they just said that we don't have any more. We just made one. We just tested it in the Arctic Circle, and we just go from there. And that it's scary, obviously, the times that we're heading into, but that's the point. Who created this, all of this first? Oh my God, we could go on and on and on. If you guys want to know more with this, that I could go on with that, because it was first initiated from a German scientist whose name was Heisenberg, not the one from Breaking Bad, the real Heisenberg. And eventually we had the US had a, this is very interesting. You guys should know this. This is a very cool part of history, if you like history. So we had a mission, which I believe is where the Inglorious Bastards movie was, or Gran Torino was influenced by. But they said it was for other purposes. But there was a mission called Mission Alsos. And what Mission Alsos was, it was by this general we had in the US. He was very vicious and on point. His name was Boris, I believe. And what he did is he led an infantry that was like 19 people in it, or not that big. And their mission was to go and find the German scientists that and the product, or the project that they were working on to create a atomic bomb before anybody even had it, which was back in 1945. Look, so 1945, yes. How did it, why did they go? Why did they have that? Well, because there was some people like Albert Einstein sent a letter to the US saying basically, hey, you need to do something here because these guys are working on something that is like this. And at that point, that's when, I think it was Roosevelt, that yes, it's so crazy because it was between Roosevelt and Truman in the timing frame. This authorized this mission. They went first, they picked up the site, apparently, where Germany was working on this stuff. They've seen for atomic bomb, you need a lot of heavy water. What's heavy water? It's basically water with much more unusual levels of hydrogen in it. And they had that buried with all in one site. And so when this infantry got there, they took over care of that site. They moved and they assembled all the reactors that they've seen, which is to create a nuclear or atomic bomb. And they moved it over and then continued to search. Come to find out that they found the scientists' results, the German scientists' results, in like some sewerage pipe. It's crazy. And then they kept looking for this Heisenberg, who took refuge all the way in the Bavarian mountains region. Eventually, Boris finds Heisenberg in May of 1945, I believe. Which look at the timing here. In August, which was 3 months later, that's when the first atomic bomb was dropped on Japan. Who was the father, or they call him the grandfather of the atomic bomb? It was Robert Oppenheimer. Yeah, I think that's his name. Yeah. So that guy, that scientist was crazy. He was the son or a kid of immigrants, Jewish immigrants, to the U.S. back in that time, and obviously he's an American citizen. He was born here, and he made that, and it was which called the Manhattan Project. And that's when Truman gave him, at that point, it was after Roosevelt. So they brought Truman, basically told them, go ahead, test it out in the New Mexico desert, which is when they first dropped the first ever, the test. And when it was dropped and it exploded in the mushroom that it made, at that moment, Oppenheimer, the only thing that was in his head was that saying from a Hindu scripture. He was, I forgot who said it. I don't know if it was Vishnu or I don't know what it was, but it was in a Hindu saying. He said, "Now I've become death, the destroyer of worlds." When he's seen that, and it actually got him like it's so crazy what eventually led up to. The guy eventually, when he's seen it being dropped, he went against it. He in fact went against going to test or create the hydrogen bombs, which was what the Tsar Bomba from Russia was like. And just because he was going on that, back in those days, they started like that same scientist that created the Manhattan Project, the first nuclear bomb. Look at his ending. He was thought that because of him being against creating more nuclear bombs and going through it, because if we've seen the kind of destruction it does, he was given the label that he's he's helping the communist way of thinking of Russia. So therefore, his clearance was all taken away. The guy got stripped from all his things. It was only all the way until the 1960s when John F. Kennedy was going to award him with like a symbol award. And John F. Kennedy got assassinated. So later on, the next president went ahead and gave it to him, which was like a few years before he died. He eventually died from throat cancer. It's so crazy. Like you see like all this. And the crazier part is when he went inside the Oval Office after they dropped the first bomb on Japan, and he went to talk, obviously with Truman, meeting the president. Truman was actually extremely pissed at him because he told Truman that now he feels, Oppenheimer felt like he has a lot of blood on his hand. Truman got upset, yelled at him, told him, "Hey, you created this, but all the blood is going to be on my hand. I'm the one who's going to give that executive order to drop this. So leave the blood talk and leave all that, conviction, all these things that are hurting your mind to me, because that's on my hand. Now you can get the heck out of my office." He actually kicked him out, literally kicked him out of the Oval Office. I don't know how we went down this story, but again, I thought that it was cool to understand like the steps of what happened throughout these times that eventually we got to this. So yeah, nuclear is not necessarily just nuclear bombs or weapons. can be used in that sense, but it also, in a good way, in a good realm, it can be used to help us with our, well, take care of global warming because of all the fossil fuels that we're going after and everything. This has zero carbonic emissions. The only issue that the nuclear energy form on us is the waste, the nuclear waste. Where do you deposit it? You don't just want to throw it in the ocean. You don't want to throw it in a backyard alley or somewhere. So I'm pretty sure that we can, as we need them, these resources, eventually we're going to need to find a way to go ahead and pump them out. I don't know, it's maybe in space, far out, something. I don't know. It's weird to kind of like feel like we have a big amount of shit, and we take it and we just throw it in the atmosphere or in the space. I think that would be crazy. So yeah, so ultimately, I don't know. Let me read some of these comments in here. Maybe I drifted away with you guys. I don't know if everybody is interested in these kind of talks or not, but yeah, I do know a lot about the or a little bit, just a little bit about historical events and things that have happened. Because you remember in that movie, Inglourious Bastards, that's what they were going there to assassinate these top levels officials or scientists and mad Nazi party members. And I think that that was influenced by Mission Alsos. If you want to go know more about Mission Alsos, go ahead and search more about it with General Boris. I think it was very, very crazy what he was able to do and accomplish in a very, very, very small entity, because they needed to make sure at the time, the source of that mission was to make sure that they get to all these projects first before the USSR got to it. Because by the time they caught Heisenberg, only 2 days later, it was announced that, Hitler was, he shot himself in his own bunker. Whether you believe, obviously, he did do it to himself or not, that comes back to you to do a lot of your own researches. We're not going to go into that realm now, but I just thought it was a kind of a cool story, a historical story for Sunday to look at these things. Let's see if I have any questions in here or people to obviously say hi to before I wrap things up. As I said, hi Pam. Yeah, save me some barbecue, Pam, because, or actually, I will probably make some for you guys all tomorrow down in, I don't know, because tomorrow I'm going to be traveling to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, Gatlinburg. So we're going to have a lot of Smoky Mountain hikes and views, and I'll do some lives from down there. It's perfect timing with all the anxiety happening around. So we'll see. Maybe I'll do a live from down there with you guys. Mr. McCown, how are you, sir? He's saying that test was about 20 minutes from his house. Mr. McCown, you're a veteran, brother. So maybe, hopefully I didn't miss. And obviously, guys, you could all fact check me on things if you know that any of these historical things that I mentioned. If it's anything else or not really what really happened and you think is different, feel free to share it in here. At the end of the day, it's all about the knowledge. And it's important to know history to see where your present and where perhaps your future will be at. Lazy Bones, shout out New Mexico. Last Cruises in the house. Jay Patagi, how are you, brother? Damn good job, spot on, brother. Well, I appreciate it, sir. Thank you for your service for our great nation. But yeah, it was important. I thought it was cool because this is now what humankind is doing, is actually trying to improve their science on the atom. Now we were able to break the atom because it doesn't die. It just, the energy kind of gets transferred, and they're all tied up in an atom. And when it's broke, then all that energy, which is unbelievable, which you could see obviously in the weapon world, in the weapon definition, you see what kind of energy it could cause, destruction beyond any means. And it's important to obviously not use it for these purposes, because we know what the end result is. It's very stupid. But for science and for things like that we depend upon, like, as I told you, the nuclearly powered plants, we have about what, like 29, 23 of them, or 93 of them in throughout the states, about 25 states or 23, 25 states. And they're responsible for 20 to 25%, at least as of my knowledge for now, of all electricity consumption in the whole country. So it's very important to invest more into this to get, and it's only a matter of time before you see that we're 100% dependent on these things. But now it leads us into another thing. What about the resource? Since we don't have access to all these resources forever, they're going to run out, similar to fuel, for example. So what do they need to do? They need to find a way to obviously recycle these elements, and that way we're not just throwing them out after they're used, and then in 80 years we're like, okay, so we can't use anything anymore, let's go back to digging fossil fuels. Well, that will eventually finish. So what about the future? Obviously we're not going to be around for it, but this is just the way obviously humanity needs to think about the next generation, not just about our time. And we need to think about the next generations, because obviously your kids' interests are in it. So what kind of world do you want to leave your kids in by the time you leave? So it's not just about our time. Obviously, it's even important for future, uh, you know, uh, generations to come. And now we have humans who are actually trying to recreate an atom by inducing a obviously non-charged electron. I believe last time I checked, I'm not a scientist, guys, so obviously, I know, like, by reading these things I remember, but now it's been a while since I've looked into this, because this was back in like 2016, 2017. But by having a synthetic one, these electrons are having a wider range of obviously movement. So once eventually, what this will this get to? Recreating life. And I'm pretty sure they're inducing all this talk into the AI, the intelligence, and eventually that's when you will see a robot that could replicate basically what a human would look like exactly. And we're seeing the advancement in that realm. Think of it like this on a big picture. Once you dive in that world, the thoughts are endless, because when you think about our galaxy, our universe, and you think about and look at how we all, like, in an atom talk or thoughts, the sun is the center, and then you got all these, the planets are the neutrons, and obviously they're moving all around the sun, and they don't deteriorate, like the earth don't go off course for billions of years. It's been moving like this. Now, what is humankind's explanation on what started the world? Because there's no answer. This, for me, further makes my conviction into the existence of a higher entity, God, even more strong, because the only answer that science has to how we formed and how we became was when the Big Bang Theory happened, like 14 billion years ago, 13.7, 14 billion years ago. And then eventually, after the Big Bang, after it all cooled down and became much, all the elements and atoms were able to adapt. Eventually, we became about. This is how the beginning. So to me, it feels like if I was looking at our whole ecosystem and the sun and the earth and other planets, being an atom of something that is far even larger. So we're just a small, tiny thing of something that's even much bigger. Yeah, once you get in the atoms world, you're gonna go there, and your thinking is gonna go expand even further and further. But to bring it back down for now to investing, not to stray away all the way to the far, whatever. For investing, what is important about the interview we heard today and we reacted to is those very, very, very important elements. How China has a strong hand on it, ahead of us, and infrastructure over it, and also on top of that, how we need to get on top of that. And by me as an investor looking at it, these elements are extremely important to us, because that's eventually what we're going to be needing more and more in the coming years. So I'll be doing my DD on which companies and what things I want to get into so that I could be ready post MOAS. Hopefully, you liked everything that we were talking about today, besides just AMC and the default of another Chinese developer earlier today as well on 2 bond payments. Let's see if we have any questions in here, and then I could go ahead and probably wrap things up. All right. So it doesn't look like we have much, or we don't have any questions. Everybody is in the Sunday mood. Nice to see you, by the way, from Jerusalem. Sorry, I didn't see it earlier. I just caught on to it. Brian C saved me some barbecue. Yeah, saved me too. Like I said, guys, tomorrow it will be probably in the middle of the day, or I'm supposed to get there by 3 or 4 p.m. in Tennessee. So probably around the market close or right after it. So I will report to you guys from there and see what my thoughts on it. Hopefully I don't have any service issues, but I can't wait to show you guys the cabin and the place we're going to be. And probably I'll have a live with you guys in the jacuzzi later on that night. So if you have one, make sure you prepare yourself for one, and we can all just be in our own jacuzzi virtually next to each other. Okay. So with that being said, hopefully you guys, you're having a great Sunday, and hopefully you have even a greater finish to your Sunday. And I see you guys on the battlefield in the pre-market, or in the market hours, or whenever I get to the freaking Gatlinburg. And with that obviously being said, much love to you all, guys. AB Investments.